Here we go. Hello and welcome to our podcast, Life, but Make It Business, where we talk about business strategies, perspectives, and lessons that can apply to your everyday life. My name is Sang Mee, and I am a current MBA student at William & Mary, working on improving my family's business.
And I am Shannon Day. I'm a project/program manager for a mid-sized consulting firm, leading geospatial, land management, soldier training, and facility assessment projects across the US. I'm also an MBA candidate at William & Mary, which led me to meet Sang Mee, and our guest here today, Mr. Vincent Grewatz, who is the director of IMCOM training. He started out at West Point and continued on to collect a bevy of degrees from Harvard, King's College London, the National Defense University. And after his Army career, he started out at Fort Gordon as Director of Public Works and took various positions across the world, and now resides at Fort Eustis as the Director of IMCOM for the past 4 years. So thank you so much for being here to chat with us today. We met through the Executive Partner Program at William & Mary. And yeah, we would just love to talk with you about your journey and about, where you've come from, where you've been, where you're going, and how, what recommendations you have to help people in their journeys. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks, Shannon. Thanks for having me. And Sang Mee, it's good to see you again. It's been last couple of months and kind of socially isolated, and not may have been able to talk. But and congratulations on starting the podcast, by the way. I think this is a great idea.
Thank you.
This is our very first one. You're our very first guest. So
inaugural guests.
Yeah, do your worst. All right, there you go.
Before we start, could I actually, because Shannon's very familiar because she's worked with military contracts and such, and I know of military. I mean, we have a lot of military students at my family's martial arts school, but what is exactly IMCOM? Like, what is it that they do?
Yeah, I was going to clarify that. It's an acronym. It's the Installation Management Command. There's a command within the Army, and there's an equivalent command within the Air Force and other services, the Navy, that are dedicated just to running military installations and basically running the cities that support the training and support military operations. So my portfolio consists of 15 cities that support training of military training on military installations. So I work very closely with the Training and Doctrine Command here at Fort Eustis, and they're responsible for training the enlisted and officer personnel in the Army, bringing them on, helping the transition from civilian to soldier in both the enlisted ranks and the officer ranks. And in addition to TRADOC, obviously, I work with Carlisle Barracks, which is the Army's War College location, as well as West Point, the military academy, which is a commissioning source for about 30% of the officers in the Army too. And that's one of my installations as well. So Installation Management Command, or IMCOM, we run the cities to ensure that the missions that the Army conducts on those installations are successful.
That sounds like a lot of moving parts.
Well, it is. I mean, installation management is not for the faint of heart, and anyone who works, I take my hat off to those who are working at the municipal level, trying to pull everything together and synchronize and orchestrate what a city does, just from the public works and taking care of the infrastructure, the utilities, to parks and recreation. We have our own parks and recreation. We have a training support directorate. We have folks who do the internal human resources and resource management and all those other things. But we've got, we also provide services across the spectrum of what any large organization provides, equal employment opportunity and safety and public affairs. All of that is woven into an organization we call a garrison, but what most people think of as the city administration. And as I said, I oversee 15 installations that have that structure and provide those services in support of Army missions or any other folks that are on the installations. Increasingly, our Army installations host Air Force and Navy as well. So we're somewhat an eclectic group. And they're not all just training. So some of our installations we have Forces Command units on some of our training installations. So we support all the missions in support of, there's usually a general officer in charge of the installation called the senior commander, and the garrison commander integrates all the services for the senior commander in support of Army missions.
That is a lot of moving parts, for sure.
Very complex, yeah.
I've
So-
definitely noticed. Yeah, go ahead, Shannon.
Oh, I was gonna kind of take it back. That's such a comprehensive and terrific explanation. And I appreciate that, as I am familiar with those acronyms and the things, but clear, not everybody is. So as you were young and you went to West Point, was that something that you wanted to always do? Is that something that was there a legacy there, or did you kind of come to it and say, I really want to go to West Point? Was that a deliberate thing? Or, I mean, obviously West Point is not something you wake up one day and just decide to go, but what kind of brought you there? Was that part of a larger trajectory that you had planned?
We have a trope that says that in the military that planning is essential, but plans are worthless. You can come up with a plan, but no plan ever survived contact with the enemy. So let me start with that. I like the way you characterize, the way you open this session by saying we're all on a journey. I didn't know what my journey would be. I was actually raised in North Dakota. And so in the heartland, where my community was a small community, 7,000 people, one high school. And I think while I was growing up, what was important to me were the institutions of the community that bound us together. I was an active member of Boy Scouts. I wasn't much of an athlete. And of course, when you go to West Point, you have to be an athlete. So that was a bit of a challenge, but academically I was fairly strong. So I had strengths, I had weaknesses, but we had institutions that would bind us together. And I sort of gained my first appreciation for a sense of responsibility and duty and civic duty that we should give back, because we were raised in a country that has given us a lot. I'm a firm believer, and this may sound controversial among some circles today, but I believe we live in a wonderful country. I believe that our country is somewhat exceptional in history, and I'm very grateful for the blessings that it's given me. It gave me a great family, gave me a great community, and it gave me values that I think allowed me to sort of set my trajectory, your term. But no, West Point wasn't first and foremost. I knew I wanted to go to school.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in the 8th grade, my mother, and by the way, my parents had split when I was 10. So it wasn't like I had a great family, but my parents did split, and they were great people. They got along fine afterward. But in the 8th grade, my mom sat all 4 of us children on the sofa and said, "Love you to death. Want y'all to go to college. Think that's important. Education is key for your development. Haven't saved enough money to send one of you, much less all of you. And so you better think now about how you would get to college. How do you intend to do it?" Now, my younger brother had some athletic ability. He may have an athletic scholarship in his future. I didn't have that option, and I knew that. And of course, my response at the time was, "Mom, I'm 13." So, but it was the first sort of realization that we have to have a plan. And my plan was go to college. And I was looking for opportunities. So I was looking for scholarships like ROTC and things like that. I applied to ROTC. I also applied to West Point, and probably the reason is my older brother had gone there the year before.
Oh,
Now,
okay.
my older brother was the intellectual giant in my family. he had actually been accepted at MIT and West Point, and he chose West Point for the character development component.
Wow.
And because he went, I said, well, this is a great opportunity. And I was fortunate enough to be offered a slot, and I went there the year after that. Now, my brother's no longer with the Army, but I've stayed with the Army throughout my career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you really sure have. After graduating and going into active duty, did you have a deliberate career goal in mind? You know, did you think I'm going to do my 4 and 4 and then leave? Or did you think, you know what, I'm really in this for the long haul? You know, and for people who aren't necessarily familiar, when you do an ROTC scholarship, and you know, definitely correct me. My understanding is you do your ROTC scholarship for 4 years, and then you commit to additional 4 years of active duty, and then I think maybe an additional, is it inactive reserve, in IRR?
There's different categories that you can. West Point's a little different. Our commitment was 5 and not 4.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And so at the time, I did not envision a long-term military career. I saw this as a tremendous opportunity. And not only because it was a solid academic institution, but it was a leader development institution. Today, they call themselves the premier leader development institution on the planet. I don't think they're wrong. I think that there is a lot to it. There's a lot you get at an academy, whether it be the Air Force Academy, the Naval Academy, the Merchant Marine Academy. All of these do in fact have the rigor of a top tier university, but they also have the character development and that comes with a military background that you would maybe not get entirely with an ROTC program. It's a little different, but I said, I want to take advantage of that. And so I said, well, I've committed to the 5 years, and we'll see where it goes after that. And basically what I learned is, as long as you like the work you're doing, stay with it. And I loved my initial assignments as a lieutenant. I served in Korea for a couple of years, and then I came back, served in a recruiting battalion in San Antonio. And I just, the 5 years became 10, became 15. And after a while, I realized this is really something I enjoy doing. I was an engineer when I was commissioned. So I did go to West Point. I got we had a concentration, not a major at the time. We now offer majors. But I was a double concentration in mechanical and civil because I was very practical, don't you know?
Right.
And so I wanted to have something I could rely on. And a quick story, one of my first mentors when I was lieutenant in Korea, I remember him asking me whether I wanted to go back to grad school. And I said, absolutely. I was academically oriented and that kind of stuff. They said, that'd be fun. He said, what do you want to study? And I said, well, I did study civil engineering, and foundation soils kicked my butt. I'd love to go back and master that and do that. And he said, no, that's a bad idea. And I said, what? I was shocked. He said, no, you're going to do a career in the military. You're going to serve in the defense of our country. By the time you leave that career, you don't want to design things. You want to oversee, manage, and lead organizations that perhaps design things. And he told me when I was just a couple years into the Army to think long term, to think about where I would be in 20 years, not next year, and to take the long view. And as a result, as you listed, I've sought since then and before new opportunities to broaden my experience. Not necessarily, I try to deepen where I can, but I have tried to broaden my experience so that I can address the uncertainty that we deal with as we go through our journey, if you will, and to look for opportunities, because we sometimes have a real clear vision of where we want to go, and other times we're trying to figure it out. And I think that's common to the human condition.
Your story is so inspiring. I have to say, a lot of my younger students, they're perfectionists. And I don't know if some of the young people, young adults that you've, mentored or seen in your career are the same way, but a lot of times they struggle with perfectionism. They're so afraid that they're going to mess up or not have the exact path. And what you said earlier about that no plan, really survives a real encounter with life. That's quite amazing. Your story, I think, would help a lot of people understand, like, yeah, you're going to have twists and turns, but what do you generally, is it how do you feel like you help people through that if you encounter that kind of thing?
One of the most critical, we have to have a good sense of the world. This podcast is about life and business. It's not just business, but we're actually human beings, and we've got to balance. This is some of the classics that you get, the mind, body, and spirit. You have to look at it all, as those who are single-mindedly focused on one thing are often disappointed when that one thing doesn't materialize. And so I am of the belief that we ought to have a plan and look for opportunities, because I think that if you are prepared, this maybe is my Boy Scout background, you got to be prepared. That's not a Boy Scout. The more you prepare, the ready you will be to respond to opportunities and challenges that you encounter. I don't think I've never met anyone who was absolutely sure where they were going. Some people have that confidence. I think humility is a virtue, and just recognize that we've got to know our limitations and be able to recognize opportunities when they're in our way, even if it's not necessarily what we planned. It might be the best thing for us, and we've got to be open to new ideas and new experiences. A bit of an aside, when I was in high school, I was actually an exchange student in Costa Rica when I was learning Spanish. I wasn't particularly adept at it, but I did spend some time in Costa Rica. And as someone who grew up in North Dakota, that's a different environment.
Yeah.
When I went to West Point, I spent a semester at the Air Force Academy. When I was in the Army, I studied in London. I went to the University of Munich on a program because I'm looking for experiences that would help me be better and help me to develop. And in so doing, I thought would help the organization I was part of. So it wasn't just self-seeking. I really do believe that leadership is about serving others, not in the self-centered way, but I think that I can be an effective leader or an effective by serving the organization and helping those who work for me achieve their full potential.
So life and kind of make it business. The pivotal point comes when you have essentially done your 20 and you're separating. What made you think, it says that you started out at Fort Gordon. Was that a place of separation, or did you seek them, or did they seek you, or how did that you just really liked golf? And so I've been to Fort Gordon, so how did that, what kind of happened? And I assume you had a family by this time, and that plays into it in a huge way. Military spouses are, so important and integral, to just everything, and that support is so important. How did that kind of play out?
Well, I'll start with saying it helps if you marry a saint, and that's where I started. So I did marry a saint, and I had 2 wonderful daughters. I actually decided to transition from the Army while I was serving in Korea in 2002, and it was just difficult to. I figured I had enough self-confidence. I said, I've got a successful career. Maybe it's time for something new. And I was open to that. So I was open to retiring and moving on, but it was just difficult to transition from Korea. So I did my final year in the Army in the Pentagon. And that was actually apart from my family. My family in the military, as you're probably aware, we do a lot of geographically separated tours and things like that. Well, my last year in the Army was as a geographical bachelor alone in DC, while my family, my daughter was still finishing high school in Texas. but during that year, I'm now transitioning. I'm looking for new opportunities and seeing what's out there. I actually considered going back and getting a doctorate because one of the things I truly enjoyed while I served is teaching at West Point. I taught economics and international relations and American politics. And so I thought that's what I was going to do. And I applied to several schools and was accepted at several. But I was then contacted by someone with whom I'd worked in the military, who said, we've got a job here at Fort Gordon that we think you'd be very good for. We'd like you to apply. And I went ahead and applied. Fun fact, at the time, I said, I've loved the Army. They've given me a great life and an opportunity to serve. But I want to get as far away from the Army and see if I can try something else. And so I never really thought I'd end up back in the Army as a civilian. I truly did not believe that. I didn't see that. I saw grad school. I saw maybe teaching in my future, and ultimately, it was an opportunity I hadn't planned for, but it kind of presented itself. I applied, was fortunately selected for it, and I've never turned back. I've been with. Back then it was called Installation Management Agency. It's now Installation Management Command. So I've been with the organization since 2003, with the exception of 3 years I did with the Army Corps of Engineers. But yeah, that was not part of the plan. It was just one of the opportunities that presented itself, and it was, in hindsight, one of the best decisions I've ever made because I truly enjoy what I do today, and it started back then.
That's amazing. Yeah, go ahead, Sang Mee.
Yeah, so you mentioned it wasn't part of your plan, especially when we're going through life planning and talking to like our spouse or friends or family, we're always like being like, I'm gonna do this. And then how do you deal with when that plan changes? Like how to communicate that, or like a way to approach it where people are like, why are you changing your mind so much? Because that's something that I don't know, I feel like a lot of people, they're, especially young people, are afraid of like changing their mind and trying to tell their parents or like people that they've been like, I'm going to do this, in like such conviction, and then having to change. Like what would you advise on that?
Confidence is a great thing. It truly is. And I think it's critically important to have a plan, to at least have an idea of where you want to go. Understand, but as I mentioned, be open to opportunities. Change can come from the outside, what we refer to as exogenous shocks, right? Sometimes the change is a positive opportunity, like at Fort Gordon, and sometimes it's a negative one, where you find out that in the military you don't get picked up for the school that you think is part of your career progression, and you truly have to come to grips with, this may be the end of my career, because if I don't go to that school, I won't be promoted, or my future is going to be different, and you see the world collapsing around you. And no, truly, you do some self-assessment and introspection. I actually had that happen to me too. Oddly enough, when I went to grad school, it was just before the Gulf War in the early 90s, and I said, I'm on a good path. I'm doing well within my year group. The career seems to be going well. My family was going well, and then the war changed the calculus that the Army used to select folks for promotion, and so you have to deal with setbacks and deal with things that change that you don't anticipate. I think how you get through it, Sang Mee, you've got to be self-aware on the one hand. I think that we have to know ourselves, our limitations and our strengths, and have an honest appraisal of who we are to be able to deal with it. At the end of the day, I think what's most important is that throughout that journey, you're developing your character, and how you respond to what life throws at you, good or bad, will make a difference in your own personal development. But the one thing that will endure through it all is your character. And if you don't attend character development properly, you can be thrown off balance really quickly because you don't know how. And so it is important that we look at who we are internal, what we believe in, what we're committed to, what we're willing to sacrifice for, who we're willing to sacrifice for. Those are all critically important decisions that will, by knowing yourself, enable you to deal with any changes, good or bad, that come with you. And make no mistake, sometimes the greatest challenge will be something good that happens to you, because it will test you in ways that something bad may not. And so we just have to be ready for that. But I think what gets you through it is who you are as a person, what you believe in, and the character that you build throughout that journey that life is. Because that's the great strength that you bring, whether it be to business or to a partnership or to a relationship and a family. That's what will keep you grounded. And I think that's the best preparation we can have.
So much of what you're saying brings to mind words that are indicative of that self-work, but also kind of skills that you continually develop. I think of resilience and tenacity, integrity, and things like that. Being in the position that you are and being responsible essentially for so many people and so much funding and money and all of the inner workings, what skill would you say serves you the most in a day-to-day, and also on the flip side, what skill would you say you kind of struggle with the most as well, and that you find yourself touching back on, to constantly kind of work on and improve? I don't I know that's overloaded now.
There's a lot in that question. People are different. People have different strengths and weaknesses, obviously. I'm a big fan of understanding our personality types. I mean, there's batteries like, Myers-Briggs. And I'm actually an introvert, but I seek new experiences, and I try to engage other folks, but it exhausts me at the end of the day, because I'm kind of an introvert. I really don't. But I think that humility is something that I think comes in handy. There's a hubris is something that I think can be an impediment, and that's not a skill per se, but I do see that it can. I go back to the character thing. Who we are, whether we're paying attention. Maybe that's a skill, is paying attention to what's around you and actually paying attention to your employees and get feedback. When this last year, we had all kinds of social unrest following the tragic death of George Floyd. And it affected our lives. It affected the people on the team, and we could sense there was something amiss. We had to have a conversation. So I actually said, we need to have discussions about this and share what's going on, because it really bothers us. It's our, and we're not going to organizationally be effective until we actually have this discussion. So we did. And that was before the Army mandated that we do it, because I think we have to be aware of what's happening, and if I'm committed to making my organization as strong as it possibly can be, I must be committed to the employees that do that mission and that deliver the service. And so I can't do that in spite of, but only through the employees. And that's what I mean by service. Now, that doesn't mean coddling. It means I have to make them better. I have to develop them, but I also have to listen. I have to know what's going on in order to address what's the concerns that we're facing, because there are challenges. We're always going to face challenges. I think that one of the things that has been most helpful for me in my career, I'm kind of in a roundabout way getting at, I think, the skill, is being open to the new experiences and being open to ideas that we may not initially be comfortable with. This is maybe, well, I'll hold that comment for a second, but when I was in high school, I was actually a member of the debate team. And we used to have this sort of game we would play within the debate team, where you would just draw a topic out of a hat and you'd have to argue for or against it. So you'd have to understand both sides of every argument. You'd have to defend something that you may not personally believe in, but you had to tease it out and augur into it to understand what are the arguments for, what are the arguments against, and let the best idea win. But you had to be open to the other side's arguments. And I think that has served me in good stead, because we have to understand the people we're talking to and understand what their aims are, what their goals are, what their objectives are. And this is true in business too. We're able to negotiate better outcomes if we understand how we're approaching the problem. We don't have the same challenge, but there may be some things that are win-win or mutually beneficial. But we do have to understand where others come from and be open to ideas that we may not be comfortable with, and open to those new ideas and new challenges, and being willing to debate and let the best argument win. Is something that I think has served me in good stead. What the comment that I almost didn't say a moment ago is, I think today we're so polarized as a country that we're not open to what the other side is saying, because we're so intent on what we believe, and we're closed to that discussion and dialogue. We're closed, and I think that's dangerous. I think it's dangerous across the country, but I think it's also not helpful individually. Because if we're closed off to things that we don't understand, or we fear the things we don't understand, we're not able to effectively deal with it. So I think that would probably be it. I think I've got a capacity to adapt in a fluid environment. And not that I invite change, but I don't fear it. And I welcome change as an agent to challenge my presuppositions, to challenge, how can I do this better, as opposed to digging my heels in and being resistant to change. So openness to change is probably it. That's a roundabout way of answering your question, but I think that sort of it is foundational. We've got to be open to change, because I think we have to recognize our limitations, and that we may think we have a good model of the world in reality, but we may not. And we might be surprised and thrown off balance if we believe simplistically that the world is a certain way and it ain't, or the challenge is a certain thing. I'll make one last comment, and I've kind of rambled here, but one of my favorite quotes from one of the TRADOC commanders here a couple of years ago, Dave Perkins was the 4-star general here at Training and Doctrine Command, and he famously said, the Army in its 243-year history has never made a bad decision. And of course we all laughed. And he said, unfortunately, sometimes we define the wrong problem and solve that problem, which is not the same thing. And I think that's sort of what I'm getting at, is we've got to have enough awareness and maybe humility to understand that we may not understand perfectly. Our perspectives are still valid, but we have to approach it with that being open to things that we may not know, may not understand, but should not fear.
Wow. I remember, I mean, we've talked earlier, like, we had dinner together with some other executive partners, and I remember, quite frankly, being very frustrated talking to you, because you kind of like questioned I was like, I'm gonna run my family's business and do this and that, and you're like, but is that really what you want? I'm like, what is this man talking about? Like, but I understand why you're like have a plan, looking for opportunities and being open. Like, I feel at peace. Like, I'm like, okay, that's what he meant, and I can better understand it now. Obviously, that's something that we're gonna continue to work on, like, as we continue talking to more mentors and getting more advice. But I do have a random question for you, which I feel like you would enjoy as a debate person. And this is something we're going to do on our Life But Make It Business podcast, just to kind of throw you off a little bit.
Okay.
This is very, as an engineer, I know this question, and I am very curious as well. So
I feel like these questions, these random ones, really kind of reveal something about you as a person too.
Okay.
I don't know. I've asked it.
You already know that I like them, but go ahead.
All right. All right, sir. Which would you rather face? one horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses?
Face.
Like fight.
Oh,
Yeah, like battle, like, defeat somehow in some way. Or I mean, you can interpret, it's not a very open-ended question.
oh.
Well, that's kind of part of it. There could, there could be other considerations. Who really knows?
Yeah, exactly. I think I would rather face a horse-sized duck. And again, for no particular reason other than if you have a lot of duck-sized horses, there's a lot of things that can be uncertain and chaos can ensue that you cannot control. But if you can focus on the objective, even if it's a large one, it's easier to at least initially engage. Now, I'm not sure what defeating a duck means. We tend to shoot behind ducks more frequently than we ought. But I would say that because again, it's I am by my very nature, as you said, Shannon, I'm an engineer. So I'm a self-described anal retentive pencil neck geek control freak engineer. At least that's how I was raised. I've become a little bit more moderate in my old age or seasoned years. But I tend to like control, despite the fact that I want to be open to opportunities. I want to be open and not closed off to new ideas. On the other hand, I do want to control the things I can control. And, the serenity prayer, control the things you can, let go of the things you can't, and have the wisdom to know the difference. And I think that by my very nature, I sent that. So I think a horse-sized duck is an easier thing to target just because you can get your head around the control pieces and come up with a strategy that would be easier than dealing with a lot of things that would be potentially overwhelming, but harder to understand.
Too many opportunities there.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, I think we're getting a little bit toward the end of our chat.
Okay.
So a couple kind of wrapping up questions. What advice would you give, or do you have a point that you usually make to soldiers who are transitioning out of the military and as they start their career?
I think it's the same general advice, whether you're transitioning out of the military or just facing life, is know who you are and the communities and institutions that you are part of. Know who depends on you and who you depend on. Don't be an island. John Donne said, no man's an island. We mentioned at the outset, the last year with COVID has created some distance among people that I think places great stress on us because we're social creatures. We need interaction with each other. If you're transitioning from an environment that you're a little more comfortable with to one that you're not comfortable with, you've got to be able to engage that new environment and still stand. You do that by knowing yourself, knowing your character, knowing what you bring to it, because that's where you stay grounded regardless of where you are. And external things won't throw you off balance. There's going to be a lot of uncertainty. Now, to your specific question, if you're transitioning from the military, and everyone eventually does. I mean, whether you transition as a 4-star general or you transition at the end of your 5-year commitment from West Point, or you transition after your first tour as an enlisted soldier, you're going to transition because there's life after the military. But I think that it's important to have learned from what you've done and have a plan and be open to the opportunity. Don't be hasty and anxious about things that you may not understand, because you're entering a different world. You know, oftentimes you go through an entire military career, 20 years, and you're very comfortable because that culture, that environment, that organization has been part of your life. And then you are cut loose and you kind of feel adrift initially. It's an odd feeling to transition if you've committed that. I think young people today grow up in a different environment than, say, I did. I grew up where there were organizations that said, come to IBM, a job for life. So you're going to work here your entire career and you won't change jobs. In the military, we got used to moving from one organization to another. So transitions within the Army were manageable after a while because you got used to doing it. I moved with my family several times. But leaving the Army is a harder thing because now you're entering a new environment. But don't be overwhelmed or anxious. I would say take your time in making the decision because you've got to be, and again, your plan may not survive contact. That might happen. But as you mentioned before, I think Sang Mee said it, you've got to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and not have any regrets about the choices that you're making. So do a little bit of research, plan the best you can, understand you won't understand everything, and be open enough to that. But know that the thing that will endure at the end is your character and who you are as a person. That will keep you grounded. And so you can adjust. If you make a mistake, adjust. You know, they say fail fast and move on. Well, I think as you transition, you may not make the initial decision right. It might turn out perfectly. You know, it does many times. But if it doesn't, don't sweat that, because you can still look back and say you would have made the same decision without regret. And so I think that when you stay true to your beliefs and your principles and your character, even if things don't work out the way you planned, you can recover because you're not devastated personally and disappointed because the decision didn't pan out. You still have to live with yourself and look yourself in the mirror. And that's why I say, I think at the end of the day, that's what we have to stay true to. Now, for me, you know, my beliefs growing up in North Dakota, being a Boy Scout, going to West Point, that was a trajectory that was not preordained at all. But I think that it reinforced and caused me to question what I believed and what I didn't believe, and the things that became true or reinforced as true have created who I am today. Now, what am I going to do when I grow up? Not sure. But there will be another transition for me and my family, I'm sure, at some point. And I'm not afraid of that. We don't need to be anxious about that. But I think that if we take care of ourselves, we're able to take care of those who depend on us, and we're able to take care of and contribute to our community. And then the opportunities will be there. I tend to believe that that's who we are as a nation, and that we can all contribute in whatever way that we feel aligns with what we believe. So I think that's a great thing about growing up in this country. And it's been, you know, those who are given the privilege of serving the country will also be able to serve the country out of uniform as well.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I did, you know, a final comment kind of on this thought, when I went to West Point, I remember the mission of the academy was to produce second lieutenants to serve as leaders in the Army, something like that. I'm paraphrasing and maybe I got wrong. When I went back to be on the faculty, they had changed the mission to creating leaders of character for service to the nation. It had nothing to do with the military. Leaders of character. And they said, we know that most of our commissioned officers coming from West Point will not stay a 20-year career. They will transition, but they will still be leaders of character. And if you have that, you will have something that's far more precious than simply the job you're doing today. And
That's cool. I'm glad they you wouldn't expect the military to do that. They would,
Yeah.
you know, want more people in the military, but they're like, you know what? You can still serve our country in other ways. So
that's right.
yeah.
I believe we have to take the long view, and too often we are consumed by the swirl of the whirlwind around us, and we become myopic, and sometimes that makes us take the long view, understand what is going to endure at the end, And so I was edified when I saw that the mission changed to say, we're going to build leaders of character. And I think that's what we should all be dedicated to. You do it in your business. You want to grow young people, not only to learn martial arts, but to be people of character. And,
Yeah. No, that's awesome advice. Thank you so much for your time and all your sage wisdom. Being our first guest on Life, but Make It Business.
I really enjoyed this, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know you're so busy.